Hello, welcome to my channel. Today's topic will be adding and subtracting fractions. So, how do we add and subtract fractions? You must have the same denominator. If your denominators are the same, you simply add or subtract the numerators together and keep the denominator, and you have arrived at your answer. If your denominators are different, you must find a common denominator to make them equal before you can add or subtract the numerators. Let's look at some examples. Here are some examples with fractions with the same denominator and different denominators. So let's look at the fractions with the same denominators. If we notice, the only thing we are doing is adding or subtracting the numerators. The denominators stay the same. So for example, 2 6 plus 3 6 equals 5 6. 8 twelfths plus 1 twelfths equals 9 twelfths. 10 twentieths minus 7 twentieths equals 3 twentieths. And 12 thirtieths minus 4 thirtieths equals 8 thirtieths. So we are only adding or subtracting the numerators. Now let's look at our fraction with different denominators. In our first example, we have 2/3 plus 1/2. 2/3 has a denominator of 3. 1/2 has a denominator of 2. Those are two different denominators. So what I must do is find a common denominator by finding the least common multiple between 3 and 2. The least common multiple between 3 and 2 is 6. So I will write my problem vertically, which is up and down, and then see how many times it takes me to get from 3 to 6, which is 3 times 2. If I multiply that 3 times 2 to get 6, I must multiply my numerator by 2 as well. So 1 times 2 equals 2, which is how I got my new fraction of 2 6. 1/2, in order for me to get from 2 to 6, I have to multiply by 3. So since 2 times 3 gives me 6, I have to multiply my numerator by 3 as well. 1 times 3 is 3, so my new fraction is 3 6. Now that I have a common denominator, I can add the two fractions together, my 2 6 and my 3 6. We only add the numerators, so that equals 5 6. Let's look at my subtraction example. I have 10 fifteenths minus 8 thirtieths. 15 and 30 are two different denominators, so I must make them equal before I can subtract. The lowest common multiple between 15 and 30 is 30. Now I must see, how do I get to 30? Well, 15 times 2 gives me 30. So if I multiply my denominator by 2, I have to multiply my numerator by 2. So 10 times 2 equals 20. So that fraction becomes 20 over 30. For 8 over 30, 1 times 30 gives me 30. So if I multiply it by 1 in my denominator, I must multiply by 1 in my numerator. So 8 times 1 equals 8. So that fraction becomes 8 over 30. So now I simply subtract my two numerators, which is 20 and 8. And I keep my denominator the same. So now 20 minus 8 gives me 12, and that fraction becomes 12 over 30. Now let's try some practice problems with different denominators. So for our first problem, we have 1/3 plus 2/5. Well, 1/3 and 2/5 have different denominators. So we must find a common denominator between 3 and 5. Well, the lowest common multiple between 3 and 5 is 15. So now we must see how we get to 3 times what gives me 15. Well, 3 times 5 gives me 15. If I multiply my denominator by 5, then I must multiply my numerator by 5 as well. So 1 times 5 equals 5. So my new fraction is 5/15. Now I must do the same thing with my second fraction. 5 times what number gives me 15? 5 times 3 gives me 15. So if 5 times 3 gives me 15, I must multiply my numerator by 3 as well. So 2 times 3 equals 6. So that fraction becomes 6 over 15. So now I can add my two fractions together because I have a common denominator. 5/15 plus 6/15 equals 11/15. Let's go down to our other addition problem. 3/4 plus 1/6. Remember, they are different denominators, so we must make them alike. So, a common denominator for 4 and 6, the least common multiple is 12. So 4 times 3 gives me 12. And I must multiply my numerator by 3 as well. So 3 times 3 is 9. That fraction becomes 9/12. 6 times what number gives me 12? 6 times 2 gives me 12. So I must multiply my numerator by 2 as well. 1 times 2 gives me 2. So that fraction becomes 2/12. Now I can add my numerators. 9/12 plus 2/12 is 11/12. So the final answer is 11/12. Let's move to our subtraction problem. 7/8 minus 1/3. First thing we must do is get a common denominator. The least common multiple between 8 and 3 is 24. 8 times what number gives me 24? 8 times 3 gives me 24. So if I multiply my denominator by 3, I must multiply my numerator by 3. 7 times 3 is 21. So that fraction becomes 21 over 24. Now I'm going to do the same thing with 1/3. 3 times what number gives me 24? 3 times 8 gives me 24. Now I must multiply my numerator by 8 as well. 1 times 8 is 8. So that fraction becomes 8 over 24. Remember, this is a subtraction problem. So 21 minus 8 equals 13. We keep the same denominator, which is 24. So the answer is 13/24. For my last subtraction problem, we have 5/6 minus 3/4. The least common multiple between 6 and 4 is 12. So 6 times what number gives me 12? 6 times 2 gives me 12. So now I must multiply my numerator by 2 as well. 5 times 2 is 10. So that fraction becomes 10/12. Now I'm going to do the same thing with 3/4. 4 times what number gives me 12? 4 times 3 gives me 12. Now I must multiply my numerator by 3 as well. 3 times 3 is 9. That fraction becomes 9/12. Now I can subtract because I have a common denominator of 12. So 10/12 minus 9/12 equals 1/12, and that is my final answer. Hopefully watching this video helps you understand adding and subtracting fractions just a little bit better. Thanks for watching.